It is your Thursday daily delivery. I'm Michael Rand. Hope you are listening to today's show somewhere in the shade or air condition or something. We don't talk about the weather that much. Sometimes we talk about it at the beginning. It's going to be hot today. Too hot for my tastes, but we'll get through it. We always do, and then we lament the cold days in the winter, and that's how we do things here in Minnesota. How we do things on this show today is that I will be welcoming in Chip Scoggins in just a little while to talk Vikings, specifically to talk about the quarterback documentary on Netflix starring Kirk Cousins, among other quarterbacks, also Patrick Mahomes, you might have heard of him, and Marcus Mariota. But Chip and I will talk about our impressions of that show, maybe how what we knew about Cousins changed or was reinforced while watching that documentary. Very good, by the way. I suggest you go check it out. So we'll get to that here in a little bit with Chip and a couple other Vikings things with Chip as well. Got some Twins thoughts here in a minute, some soccer thoughts in a minute as well. First, though, what I missed, the Lynx get a big win on Wednesday. Beat the Mystics 97-92. Notable in a few different ways. One, kind of keeps the Lynx firmly in kind of the bottom half of that playoff bracket. The WNBA rewards 8 out of its 12 teams with playoff spots. And the Lynx are fairly firmly entrenched in that top 8, even with an 11-13 record this season. You thought the Twins would have a hard time missing the playoffs given the softness of the AL Central. The bottom of the WNBA is quite forgiving this season. Seattle 4-19, Phoenix 6-17, Indiana 6-17. That's 3 of the 4 non-playoff teams almost guaranteed at this point, unless one of those teams suddenly goes on a roll. And the Lynx are still, comfortably not miles ahead, but comfortably ahead of Chicago, which is 9-14, and LA, which is 8-15. So good chance the Lynx make the playoffs, but to do that, they have to win games like the one they did Wednesday. Did not play great defense, but did enough towards the end. However, star Napheesa Collier hurts her ankle late in the game. They managed to finish the game off even without Napheesa Collier, but she will be out probably for an undefined amount of time. We don't know yet how bad the injury was, but it was bad enough to keep her out of the final few minutes of that win on Wednesday, and figures to be at least a short-term problem. And a short-term problem for her is a short-term problem for the Lynx because she obviously makes them go, and they have quite a difficult schedule coming up, playing some of the best teams in the league here coming up. Just reading from Kent Youngblood's game story, I think they start Friday in New York. They play their next 3 games against the top 3 teams in the league. And as bottom-heavy as the league is, it is also top-heavy. Those top 3 teams in the league, Las Vegas 22-2 this season. Yeah, that's pretty good. New York 17-5. And Connecticut 18-6. That will be a daunting challenge. The Lynx have not necessarily fared well against the best of the best this season. So even at 11-13 right now, they could be facing some difficult times up ahead. But a big win for them on Wednesday, and that's good news for them. Let's talk international soccer for just a moment here as well. The U.S. women got a draw against the Netherlands in the Women's World Cup on Wednesday. A hard-earned draw, 1-1. Some griping from the fans that there weren't enough substitutes in that game. I caught some of that on social media. People love to complain about that. It seemed justified in this case, though. I believe they only used 1 substitute in a game where they maybe could have, in a tight game, that is a interesting decision to make, but maybe there's a reason for that. We are not the ones in charge here, so that was that can be second guessed, but who knows what the ultimate right decision there was. What we do know is that the U.S. is getting a pretty good challenge here in this Women's World Cup. I think that broke a streak of 13 straight wins for them in that cup, and so they have to they have to really kind of double down now in the final stages of group play and then into the knockout stages if they want to repeat. This is not, like I talked about a week or two ago with John Marthaler, this is not the not the clearly dominant U.S. team that it has been in the past. So that's what makes this Women's World Cup so intriguing, and we'll be watching to see how they do in that final game here in just a few days, that final game of group play. Interesting too, Noah Furtado, our intern who did the show last, I think it was last Friday they did the show. Shout out to Noah again. Had a good story on Minnesota United and just how they believe they are closing, how Major League Soccer is trying to position itself as kind of a global option for soccer players. Not just hey, come play here at the end of your career, or here's where the young up-and-comers are going to start, but they're eventually going to transfer out. Don Garber, the commissioner, has made no bones about wanting this to be a destination league, and it certainly has gained in stature over the years, gained in kind of the viability of it, and taking another step this year. So far, 8-6 in this Leagues Cup. This is the first year of the Leagues Cup where they're playing all the Liga MX teams. MLS 8-6 against Liga MX teams, including the Loons, with a 4-0 win the other day against Puebla. Loons coach Adrian Heath saying, we're at the stage now where a lot of players see this now as a viable alternative to Europe. That's interesting. I mean, the league is obviously not just in its infancy anymore. It's almost 30 years old now, Major League Soccer, so it's been around for a long time, but leagues take time to kind of gain traction. They take time to gain the kind of financial stability that is required to attract some of the best players, and they frankly take some of the time to gain the infrastructure and the right way of doing things so that the games themselves are good to watch for fans. And I don't think this is ever going to be the best league in the world, but if they could position themselves to be one of the top 5 leagues in the world, which I don't quite think they are even yet, but if they could get into the top 5, top 3, become, like Heath said, a viable alternative to playing in Europe, not just a place where you go to kind of like wind down. You're like a retirement home for wayward 38-year-old stars. If you can become that, they have Lionel Messi right now playing in MLS. That's amazing. He's at the end of his career, but he certainly has a lot left to give. Like if they can get some of those more caliber of players and also some of the kind of young stars to stay in this league, that will only help the growth of this league. And they do believe they are well on their way.
MGM Wine and Spirits is the choice for savings, service, and a great selection of spirits, pre-mixed cocktails, wines, and of course, ice-cold beers and hard seltzers. With over 30 locations throughout the Twin Cities and beyond, there's an MGM near you. Head to MGMWineandSpirits.com to find a convenient location in your area. Get social. Follow MGM on Facebook and Instagram for all the latest news and trends. Make great moments with MGM Wine and Spirits, your locally owned and operated choice for over 50 years. Save time, save money. Shop MGM.
Happy to be joined today on Daily Delivery by Star Tribune columnist Chip Scoggins. Chip, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. I'm just back in the swing of things. I had a little bit of time off last week, but now it always feels like when Vikings training camp started, Chip, we're kind of like, it kind of feels like we're starting to get back into that mode of, okay, now there's things going on. It snuck up on me. Not the start of camp snuck up on me. I talked and wrote about this a little bit on Wednesday's show, but how newsy or just kind of how many things are kind of hanging in the balance right now.
Yeah.
Which Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah had to address and, kind of sidestepped a lot of it. But just, the Daniil Hunter situation, Jordan Addison's recent off-field transgression, they got other
Justin
stuff, Jefferson, and the guy that we want to talk about a lot today, Kirk Cousins, who goes into this year, final year of his contract. He hasn't had that in Minnesota. He had that obviously in Washington a couple of different times, as he kind of played out those franchise tags and things like that. But I want to talk about Cousins with you in the context too of that Netflix documentary Quarterback, which I finally got a chance to watch most of it. I know you've watched it too, and I thought that was a pretty fascinating lens into Cousins. So, Chip, maybe we start there and kind of get into some camp stuff.
Yeah.
What did you make of? Just give me your overall impression of what you saw, particularly of Cousins from that Netflix documentary that I think a lot of us have seen at this point.
Yeah, I think it showed a number of things that I found revealing. Let's start with the physical aspect.
Yes.
Both the data and our eyes told us that he got hit a lot last year. But that documentary did a really good job of showing how much that added up on him and the process that he had to go through every week just to get his body prepared to play again the next Sunday. Whether it was just, the rehab, the massage therapist, bodywork people that he had come over every Friday. He dealt with a lot last year behind the scenes. The rib injury that I think he got after was it the Washington game?
I think it was Washington and Buffalo. I think he aggravated it against Buffalo. He took 2 pretty good hits right in those back-to-back weeks, right in that same spot.
Yeah, and he's been durable, and it's been discussed a lot that, I don't think he's missed a game because of injury in his career, and he's always there. But Mike, when you see see it on video and you see it documented, that has to change this year. That just doesn't seem like a sustainable thing. And some of that's on him, right? Because he's not a mobile quarterback. He doesn't. I was talking about this with Ben Gessling yesterday that if he's not going to keep plays alive with his feet, he probably has to hang in the pocket a little bit longer and absorb those shots to let his receivers come open. So some of that's, I don't know, it might be a little bit unavoidable, but I just don't think you want to go through another season of him taking that. He led the league amongst quarterbacks in hits.
Yeah.
You don't want to go through another season like that because eventually the durability's, it has to, you don't want him missing time and he's been, he's always there and he always shows up, but he really has to go through a lot to get his body ready.
Yeah, I think we take his durability for granted almost too, and it's been there every year, and you come to assume it. And I think some of it is that we saw in the documentary, he does take really good care of himself, and even this past off season, he's taken it to another level, as he talked about earlier this week in camp, and hiring a full-time bodywork person, someone who's trying to preserve the back end of his career and help him stay healthy. But that's not been a problem for him, but you don't want to take that for granted. And you're right. I think the documentary showed not just how tough he is, and that reinforced some of that for me. I think a lot of what the documentary did for me, I think, was reinforce the things that I already liked about Cousins. I'll get into a couple of those more in a minute. But the durability piece and the toughness piece, and to take the most hits in the league, like we've talked about, and still be able to stay on the field, to still play. And even just hearing him groaning on a lot of those plays, and hearing how audibly, distressed he was, especially at the end of that Buffalo game, which, probably is a combination of injury and just being completely gassed at the end of the game. That's the fatigue of that game. And the emotion of that game and all the twists and turns, but just what he had to go through. And then, you do wonder how much of a toll that takes on, by the time you get to a playoff game, or by the time you get to a certain point in the season, what's the cumulative effect of that?
Well, that is right. And, he does a good job of either dealing with it or ignoring it, or, just allowed himself not to let that be a focus, because I don't know that it affected his play. It certainly didn't seem like he was, hobbling or anything like that. So he he's done a good job of kind of mitigating it. The other thing that really jumped out to me, and we know this about him, that he's very detail oriented, very driven, but just the process of how much he studies and how committed he is in all facets to try to be the best player he can be. And I think a lot of that stems from, he's always been, he's probably sees himself not the most physically gifted, and not this or not that. And so he talked about it yesterday, that with at the opening of training camp, getting the body work coach, that he's going to do everything he can to give himself the best position to have a longevity career and try to win a championship. And so, that comes through with his study. And I think it's sometimes he probably is an overthinker.
Yes.
Right.
And he even admits that, I think.
Yeah. I think, is he the one that says, his greatest strength can be his greatest weakness?
Yeah.
That
he said things like that. And he said he has a tendency to overthink things and kind of get lost in his own head, and has to realize kind of when he has to let go of those thoughts. And I think that was maybe in the section with the psychologist that he sees with the Vikings.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And that was interesting too, that he wanted that part of because I think they had some editing that control over what was showed. And I think that they included that was important. But really, one of the most fascinating things I found was the byplay he had with Kevin O'Connell during those tense moments on the sideline.
Yeah.
There's a couple times, I think it was the Miami game and the Buffalo game, where Cousins was really heated. Oh, it was the Miami and then the Colts game. And O'Connell said, something to the extent of, first of all, you got to settle down. Let's lower the temperature. Let's lower the temperature here. And then the Buffalo game where he changed the play, or he did the quarterback sneak.
Yeah.
And Cousins and O'Connell was like, "What was that? I was going to call a timeout. You got to work together here. We got to trust me." So I asked Cousins about it yesterday. I said, we saw your relationship with him in some really stressful moments, tense times. How did that, kind of evolved over the season? And he said, that's what exactly did. It evolved and it'll continue to evolve. And so that was a coach and a quarterback first year filling out personality, and O'Connell in the documentary says he's learned to just kind of let, in those stressful moments, let Cousins kind of fume for a little bit and then go back to him. And so I think they'll be even better this year in terms of I think they had a good relationship to start with. I think they'll be even better this year. And Cousins said just having that equity in that year that they can go back and say, remember in that Buffalo game, or remember then Washington, we did this.
Sure.
I think it's going to pay dividends for him this year.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I think this goes along with some of the things you were saying just now. The other thing that the quarterback did do for me was reinforce, you're right, his work ethic and how much he puts into it. And he's almost like, just thinking about how hard he has to work, what he's had to do just to be above average, not elite, but one of the 12 best quarterbacks in the world, but no better than the 8th best, I would think, on any given list. Certainly not in the top 5. So he's not, quote unquote elite. He as hard as he works, he can't get into that category because he does have some physical limitations. He's just not going to get into that echelon because of what he can and can't do. So, he's in some instances kind of like the student who has to study really hard just to get a B+. But you admire that to a large degree. You also, sometimes I wonder with overachieving athletes, or specifically even with overachieving teams, whether that runs out at a certain point if you don't have another gear. Essentially, if you get to the playoffs, the moments, and you don't have another gear where you've been giving 110% all along, and then the team, when the talent wins out and the team that has another gear to get to wins. And I think about that in the context of some of those Twins teams that have lost in the playoffs, things like that.
Yeah.
Like I don't know, some of the Wild teams I think that have made the playoffs and then fallen short. I don't know how much there is to that, but I think of that sometimes in the context of Cousins.
Well, and is that a way of saying you just feel like there's a ceiling there that it's going to be hard? If you watch that documentary,
yeah,
and you watch Mahomes, and you just feel like this guy's going to win a lot of Super Bowls because he just has this killer capacity in these big moments. And not only is he like supremely gifted and can do all these crazy things, but I think for Mahomes, it also shows his work ethic and also his football IQ to be able to recognize things and, just kind of do things on the fly and just process things. You feel like you're always going to have a chance to win a Super Bowl when he's on your team. I think with Cousins, I think everything needs to come together, because I just don't think he has that ability to rise above when things are not great. Yeah. Right. And so the ceiling is lower. And so you got to have a great defense. You got to have things fall in place. You got to maybe have to get a little bit of luck. You got to avoid injury, those type of things. But I do think, is it sustain? I mean, are you saying, can you reach a championship level, or can you sustain this year after year after year and put yourself in position? I think they can do that with him, because I think he's always going to be good enough to give you a chance to be a playoff team. And if he's surrounded by, the right mix. But you're right that he's, there are limitations, but when you see Marcus Mariota, you realize they're in a lot better spot than what Atlanta was with him. It was a different. There are 3 different levels of this documentary. That were crystal clear.
Well, yeah, and that gets to the point of, like, Cousins has to be kind of comfortable, at least in his own skin, to agree to this, because he has to know kind of how this is being framed. Like, you've got the elite, Super Bowl quarterback, and you've got, the fringe starter who was, was a high draft pick at one point, but now is trying to hold on to his job and his spot in the league. And here's Kirk Cousins, good, not great. He's being portrayed as kind of the guy in the middle, right? And he has to be comfortable with that to a certain degree.
Yeah, and I was, I was talking about this yesterday, is that you have to know that this documentary, because it's produced by Peyton Manning, they're going to have some editorial control over what's in there and what's not. So it's going to make the quarterbacks look mostly favorable, right? You're going to look positively. And for Cousins, you got to feel like he's, there's nothing, what we saw is like, a guy who works really hard, is passionate, cares about it, people like him, great family person, great dad, husband. Well, Mike, he's in the last year of his contract. There's 31 other teams that are going to watch this quarterback and see him in his best light, right? And Cousins, all the things that he's going to bring. So this is, if it's not going to be here next year with the Vikings, it's a heck of an audition, and for people to get a glimpse of who you are for the other teams too. So I'm sure for him, in his camp, maybe they looked at it that way too. It's like, hey, I can show other teams like what I'm about. They can see behind the scenes how I prepare, how kind of the person I am. So it was, I'm sure in that way, it was a big win for him too.
Well, I was kind of wondering about that. I was going to ask you that, and then maybe move on to some camp stuff. But like, what was his, aside from being comfortable with that feels like it was a bit of his end game in agreeing to this, because I don't think he's the world's like foremost open book. He doesn't have a problem, being in front of the camera and talking to us, and even giving people glimpses of his life. I mean, he invited Ben Gessling in for a long visit in Michigan a while ago. Like, he's got that element to him, but there was probably an element of, okay, I don't quite know where my future is going to take me. What, if I'm in this and things go reasonably well, and I don't think they could have gone a ton better for him than to be, followed for a 13-4 season, even if that wasn't his best statistical season ever, but to show some of those traits that he has. Like, do you think that element played into it, that he, there was not self-promotional, but like he saw it as an opportunity to be like, hey, I don't know where this is going, but this could paint me in a favorable light and let people see me a little bit more.
Well, I think it's multifaceted. One, I do believe when he said he felt like this would be a good way to show fans kind of what it's like to be a quarterback, give him a glimpse behind the curtain a little bit. And I think his personality was not allowed, or he didn't feel comfortable kind of showing who he was under Mike Zimmer in the way that he did with Kevin O'Connell. I mean, that was abundantly.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody who's spending time around him, he was a different quarterback last year. He felt more comfortable. I mean, the Kirk chains, all this stuff. I mean, he was just, we saw more of his personality. And I think he appreciated that and liked it. And so I think this was a way for him to show, kind of further who he is as a person, what he's about, all those things. And so is that. But I also think there has to be a small part that says, okay, if I'm not going to be with the Vikings next year, this is a really good opportunity to show all these other teams who I am, how I'm, what I'm about as a teammate, as a guy who studies, prepares himself, does all the right things off the field. You can't say that's not part of it. I mean, it's a good promotional thing for him. And he said he would not have done this if it would have been a big production. And I don't know that any media member knew this was happening last year.
I certainly didn't. Yeah, I think we didn't. Not till after the season did we start to hear about it. Yeah,
exactly, because there were not cameras in the locker room. We didn't. There's not, and he wouldn't have done it. And I agree. I believe him when he says he wouldn't have wanted that taken away from, like have this big circus all around. So we didn't even know this was going on, and so they kept it a nice secret. So I don't think his full intention was, hey, let's all about me and show me. But I think it's, kind of as a byproduct of this, him saying, hey, if it doesn't work out here, I have an opportunity to show other teams kind of who I am.
Yeah. And getting beyond that now, let's talk for a few minutes about the start of camp and kind of who has stuff to prove. Because, I mean, Cousins is kind of at the top of that list now. Kwesi talked on Tuesday, kind of said, they still have good dialogue. This is just more where they are right now is more about the fact that both sides just couldn't see an exact path forward yet, but that this could still be a long-term thing. Like I'm coming around more to the idea that he could still be here, but also I think they realize where his ceiling is. It's an interesting year for Cousins and just the organization as a whole. Like, does this competitive rebuild idea, does it work? Are they going to be like, can they straddle that line? There's a lot riding on Cousins. There's a lot, frankly, there's a lot of evaluation of Kwesi, I think, that's happening this year, because I think that we know more about O'Connell at this point than we do Kwesi.
Yeah, I was going to say, if you ask me who the spotlight is on the most, I would not say a player. I would say Kwesi.
I agree.
Because you have to sign Danielle Hunter. You have to sign Justin Jefferson. You have to sign TJ Hawkinson. You have to figure out what your quarterback plan is. And he talked about yesterday that in his position, you have scenarios.
Yep.
And I would think with Cousins, there's 3 different scenarios. One is you sign him to a long-term deal. 2, you try to do another, bridge 1 or 2 deal, or you move on and you try to draft a guy or bring in a bridge quarterback. So, yes, this is a big year for Cousins, but I don't think he's going to show us something we don't already know or haven't seen. He's going to have a good year, right?
Yep.
He's in it. He's got all the things around him. He's going to have a good year. I would be surprised if he doesn't. And so it's just for them, one, does he wants a long-term deal. Are they going to be able to do that? Or are they just going to say, you know what? We want to have a more inexpensive quarterback and try to build around that. So this is a big spot for Kwesi, because last year was a little bit of more of the same. This year this is your team, Kwesi. This is your plan. This is your blueprint. He said this year is about growth and development. That was the term he used yesterday.
Yeah.
Which is another way of saying competitive rebuild. But there's so many new guys on defense that were either special teams guys or backups that occasionally filled in as starters injuries that are now going to be starters. Guys have to play a lot, and so we don't know. They're not all going to hit, right? They're not all going to be what you envisioned. I mean, there'll be some that it will, some that it won't. And so they have to figure out who they can build around. But this is a big, big year, I think, for more than anyone, Kwesi.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think, maybe final point here, and I wrote about this a little bit Wednesday, that he, by terming this a competitive rebuild, which, it gives you kind of 2 kind of competing tracks, it has made these decisions a little bit harder, right? Like if they were clearly trying to just compete and win right now, this Danielle Hunter situation wouldn't be as complicated. If they were just trying to compete and win 10 games for the next few years, Kirk Cousins would be signed right now. They're trying to figure out kind of the present and the future all at the same time, trying to win now while also being able to win later. And the way they've kind of painted themselves is making their decisions harder.
Well, it is, because I think he even acknowledged it. He said yesterday, Kwesi in his camp press conference, he said, "I can tell you the mathematical odds of doing." He didn't say the Bears, but basically what the Bears and other teams that have tanked and just did a full by definition rebuild, like. A bunch of young guys and just they don't want to do that. I don't think ownership has a stomach for that. They don't want to do that. And Mike, when you have Justin Jefferson, you don't want to do that.
No.
When you have Harrison Smith and these guys, you don't want to just say, all right, we're just going to play a bunch of young guys. If we win 3 games, okay, we're building for 4. I mean,
but if they did want to do that, the Cousins decision would be easy. The Hunter decision would be easy. Like
it would be easy. It'd be a lot easier. Yeah. But they're in the middle. They're in the middle and trying to figure out. And that's kind of been it has been the story of this franchise, is like they're stuck in that middle, right?
Yeah.
Good enough to be a playoff team, not good enough to really ascend beyond that.
Right.
So they're caught in between. I think some of it because of their personnel. They're good enough that you just, again, I go back to, if you have Justin Jefferson, you're like, we're going to win 3 games and try to, so, no, you don't want to waste years. I mean, in the NFL, you just can't waste years, and so it's complicated. And I don't know I don't think they're going about it the wrong way. But to me, everything it just starts with that quarterback thing. And like what I understand, like I don't know that I want to commit 4 years to Cousins right now. 2 years,
No.
I'd do 2 years.
Maybe, yeah.
This year and another year.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
This year and another year.
Yes.
Would I want to do 4 years? I just think,
No.
But this is why this is a big reason why they hired Kwesi and Kevin O'Connell to figure out that quarterback situation, find who's going to be your franchise guy, and have trust that they're going to pick the right guy, whether it's in the draft. But again, it goes back to Mike. If they're good enough to be they absolutely should be good enough to at least contend in their division, win the division.
Yeah, they're going to be a 7 to 10 win team, I think. I mean, that's
what kind of draft pick is that going to get you?
Exactly. That's exactly it. Like,
you're not going to be in the Caleb Williams discussion.
No, you're not. So that's the.
You're not going to be in the Drake May. I know. I don't. But
how do you do it? Like,
I don't know.
Do you trade Justin Jefferson? Nah,
absolutely not. They'll run you out of town for that.
Yeah, they would. Well, it's fascinating. It's going to be a really interesting year. It's an interesting year for a lot of these players and for a lot of the decision makers. It gives 2023 an element of intrigue that it might not otherwise have, especially watching what will happen with Cousins. Chip, appreciate it as always. Everybody go watch that documentary. It was very well done, worth your time on Netflix. Quarterback, aptly named. And Chip, we'll talk to you again soon.
All right, brother. Thanks, man.
Good stuff from Chip, and I only hinted at my Justin Jefferson hot take with Chip. I was joking, and I brought it up on the Access Vikings podcast that went live on Wednesday. I had to bring it up to those guys, Ben Gessling and Andrew Kramer, just kind of as a here's a wild thought I've been having lately. What do you think of this? And we had a good talk about it, just kind of not in really even a realistic or serious way, but just kind of a thought exercise in what that would look like, why in certain scenarios it could be considered, things like that. He's one of the best players in football. He might be the very best player in football right now. Certainly one of the 3 or 4 very best non-quarterbacks in the NFL. You don't just go and say, well, we want to get a pile of assets for that. That's a player you want. Assets are only valuable if they become players like Justin Jefferson. So I'm not advocating for this anyway, but I think these are interesting thought exercises to think about these things that nobody else would think are plausible. And then in retrospect, when they do happen occasionally, you think, well, we never saw that coming. So why not talk about it first? Why not think about how that might look? So we did that on Access Vikings. So go check that show out. We did a lot of training camp preview stuff on that show as well. So go check that out. Let us finish with the coolers. Some Twins stuff to get to here. This is going to be kind of a long cooler, I suppose, because I got a few things here. They lost 8-7. Finale of that Seattle series. Wasn't the bullpen this time. It was Joe Ryan. He gave up a lot of runs in this game. He's been struggling lately. Twins starting pitcher. A lot of home runs. I think 13 home runs in the last 6 starts for him. That is not good. So they lose that game, lead down to 2 in the American League Central, and they made a trade. They traded Jorge Lopez, who they got at the trade deadline last year. They traded him to the Marlins straight up for Dylan Floro, kind of a trade of 2 relievers who have struggled this season. The sum total of that trade not looking great for the Twins right now because they dealt away Yanier Cano, who's become an all-star for Baltimore, plus 2 top 30 prospects to the Orioles, Cade Povich and Juan Nunez, in that deadline deal to get Lopez last season. They thought he was going to be the difference maker in their bullpen down the stretch last season. He was not. They faltered down the stretch. They still thought, hey, guy under team control for 2 more years, this year and next year, and he just hasn't been that same pitcher this year. Traded him now to the Marlins. We'll see if Dylan Floro can be any more of the back end of the bullpen guy that they hoped that Lopez could be. But the sum balance of that trade not looking great for the Twins right now. But we'll see if they still have enough as the season goes along to finish off games and get into the postseason. And that leads me to an email from Don, the very end of the show here. Don writes, he was listening the other day. He writes, hearing you talk about the baseball playoffs, how the Twins would likely play the number 6 seed, and that the Twins would not have won their last 18 playoff games mainly due to the Yankees. Wouldn't it be ironic if the Yankees wind up being the last wild card entrant? They are just 2 games out of the last spot as of this morning. Ha! Yeah, Don, I have a bit. I had thought about that when I was doing that segment, talking. I think it was talking with Lavelle about the format and just how the Twins, if they do wind up winning the division, it's more favorable than it used to be. They won't be the road team; they'll be the home team. They would have all three of those wild card round games at home. But yeah, what if it is the Yankees? Just their luck that they finally escape all these years of having to face the top-seeded or second-seeded Yankees, and the Yankees wind up as the sixth. We'll see what actually happens, but yeah, that thought did cross my mind, Don. We'll cross that bridge, I guess, when we get there, and any way you get into the playoffs, I guess, is a good problem to have when it comes to your opponent. That will do it for me here today. Plenty of stuff coming up on Friday's show. A lot of outdoors talk, I do believe, with Bob Timmons. Does a great job with the outdoors writing and editing. I think we're going to talk about the smoky air and the impact that is having on summer outdoors, summer camping plans, and things of that nature. So stick around for that on Friday, in addition to plenty of other Twins and Vikings thoughts. Until then, I'm Michael Rand, and we'll see you again tomorrow.